Welcome everybody to yet another episode of Common Grounds of Self-Determination. I am Charles Cole, joined by my brothers David Castillo and Omar Yanar. One of us is actually running for office and looks like a full candidate today, and it is not the guy in the dapper pink hoodie. So Omar, let's start with you. How you feeling, man? I actually do like this camera here. It does look nice. How are you feeling, brother?
Man.
How's it going?
I am exhausted. I'm exhausted, man, but I am feeling good. I am fighting the good fight, in my opinion. It's a hell of a race. So, the State Board of Education is something that is picking up a ton of steam, I think, across the country, but particularly in Texas, as people talk about the history curriculum and banning books and the recent laws in the state of Texas that are essentially trying to omit history. So there's a lot of attention placed on the state board elections this year. But when it comes down to it, in our world, as much as we know and care and love about education, like State Board of Education is such a down ballot office that people really, sort of know it, but don't really have the full grasp of it. So it's a lot of just like name recognition and getting my name out there and tons of like politicking and so forth. So it's been a lot of fun hearing constituents. It's been very interesting hearing how the AFT has reacted to someone like me running. It's very interesting to hear how threatened folks are to have someone that cares about all kids, regardless of public school that they're in, versus just these group of kids, because the AFT says we should only care about these group of kids. And that's a pretty extreme and radical position to not care about kids. So hats off to the AFT for only caring about a select group of kids. In fact, they don't really care about kids. They really only care about the adults. And then even then, they don't really take care of the adults either. So It's a hell of a spin in the world of politics, Doc. But man, you looking good. What's going on?
I appreciate that. I'm on the road. I'm on the road, and I have my little mobile studio with me. I brought the wrong lens, but the lens is working out. It's just that my computer and the camera is way back. But I'm really happy to be here, and I got to see some schools today. I got to. There is a documentary that I was a part of around Black folks and choice. And our, just our right to be able to do that. And it took place in barbershops and beauty salons. And it was just really cool to like really break that down and talk about that yesterday and watch that with all these folks in Indianapolis. I will be here for a few more days, and then I have meetings in Kentucky, and I'll be down the road that way and come home for a few days and then back on the road. I'll actually be on the road with this guy at the bottom at some point too, in the near future. So let me segue into the stylish, the hype beast himself today. You know what I mean? Like, let me make sure that let me bring him in right, because he is just more than the beard of wisdom, the beard of knowledge today. He is, what I'm saying, he skater boy like model right now. You know what I'm saying? He look good, skin glowing. How you doing,
so how, man?
His skin is glowing today, brother. It's absorbing all that light. What's up, man?
We just had a delivery, so I had to put on the fresh hoodie, before it gets washed. It's nice and it feels fresh. And pink, I feel like pink, orange, light brown, these kind of colors go well. Like a light blue, they go well with my skin tone. So you got to work the skin tone, right? You got to know what you're working with, right? That's what we're talking about, right?
I think it looks good on you, brother. Listen, I'm easy work, right? You got the Vidal Sassoon model up in the top right. You know what I'm saying? Like, so, and you see how he's rocking. He looks like a candidate, but he's a very stylish candidate. He is not out of touch. You know what I'm saying? Like, you do your Taylor proud there, Omar.
Thanks so much, man. I appreciate that. I'm just trying to keep up with y'all, man.
You have like a Mondale Ferraro button on. What do you got on?
Yes. What are you wearing today?
We're about Walter Mondale, man. That's like 1984. That was like 1984. Was that like the biggest landslide election in history? Was that Reagan Mondale, 1984? Yeah, man,
we're
that's
not
how much of
about
a
that
nerd
energy.
I
That's
am
right.
that I know such things, man.
I was a year old. I was a year old, but I read all about it when I was a poli-sci major. It was a thrashing.
We're doing good, man. We're doing good. Just finished up with a PD, professional development, working with a charter network up in the Bay Area, and so that was a good project that we're working on. It's always good to work directly with educators. I miss that work, so I'm glad whenever I have an opportunity to do it, to engage with them, whether it be over hundreds of miles or in person and in the room with them. So shout out to all the folks that I was just had the opportunity to spend a couple of hours with in the Bay Area. What else is happening? Let's see. There's a lot happening in the world in general. I look forward.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna bring that in. I got you, brother. I'm gonna bring that. I got an intro for that.
Digging into the topics. I'm just trying to think if there's anything that I'm missing out on. No, I mean, I think I'll just drop a seed here. I think at some point, as our show is developing, it would be great to, I feel like there are a couple of topics that we've kind of avoided or we haven't hit on, whether that be by design or just by default. And so I think we should look into some of those things. Like right now, what's happening is things are opening up in California. We may end up having the mask mandate dropped. And so, maybe digging into, COVID, masking, homeschooling, all of those things, like through the lens of how Black and brown families experienced it, because it's all coming back up in the news again. And so maybe for a future show, it's something that we could dig into. But we got our work cut out for us today. So,
hey, I'm with it, man. I'm down to have that conversation. Any other conversation that we might not have been able to touch on. And speaking of which, if you are enjoying these conversations and you are here right now, we need you to like this. We need you to love it. We need you to comment, and we need you to share it. Okay. And don't just share it, like just push the share button, like put a message in there. If you rock with us, we got the 2 models over there. I just carried a water, like talk about that. You know what I mean? Like get people over here. We want to bring these conversations about education to the ground level. We do education talks for real people. This is not jargon. This is not what the wonks talk about. This is how this is impacting Black and brown people at the ground level. So if there's ever something we talk about and you don't understand, ask us, because our job is to make sure that we're opening it up. So, take that time, let us know that you shared it, and we'll shout you out for sharing. And there is a lot of stuff happening in the world today. Unless you're under a rock, Russia is in the process of invading Ukraine, and actually Ukraine is fighting back. There has been a lot on this topic that's just kind of been going on. The president, Putin of Russia, has been very, very direct. He has threatened whoever decides to stick their nose into this conflict. For many insiders, for many folks that know global politics, a lot of folks are worried about the precipice of World War III because Ukraine is one of our allies, people that we've said that we would protect. And Putin has been very clear. His threat was very direct, and where he said, your country will face consequences never before seen in history, which a lot of people feel like he's alluding to nukes. And for those that don't know global politics, Ukraine got rid of all their nuclear weapons, somewhat at the behest or understanding that Russia would never turn or point their guns at them. Ukraine has been a free state for about 30 years. I don't know if people know that USSR backstory or whatnot, but there's a lot happening. So fellas, one, let me just get your general reaction to it, with the understanding that we know that there's a lot of information coming at us fast. And, like everyday people, a lot of everyday people are not aware in global politics, and that doesn't disclude us. So there's a lot of learning that we have to do on our end. But, I would love to hear from you all. And Omar, let's start with you. Just general reactions as you've been, hearing about whatever.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to be a little one-sided on this issue. I was just in Budapest. I was just in the Czech Republic. I was just in the Soviet bloc. I mean, I didn't take like a deep analytical survey, but from what I got from the consensus of everyone that I spoke to, they were pretty stoked not to be communist or in part of that like Soviet bloc anymore, particularly the Czech Republic. We're just ecstatic to not be part of this overall dominant Soviet imposition that existed when we were growing up. And ultimately, I think that they enjoyed the fact that they got to be autonomous, arguably for the first time in their existence. So I get the feeling that Ukraine is in a similar situation where they have been granted this autonomy for 30 years and probably pretty stoked about it. Look, for all of us who have studied history before, like this smells very, how do I say, deja vu-y. I mean, was it not Hitler that just kind of said, like, we're going to kind of go into Poland and it's going to be cool and like, let's not worry about it. And we're just going to kind of like test the waters. And, the United Kingdom and the United States were like, maybe we should look at this, but maybe we shouldn't do anything. Maybe Hitler's intentions are okay. And then we all know what happened. This smells a lot like that, fellas. This smells a lot like Putin testing the waters to see what he's able to get away with, because Ukraine is filled with resources. The Russians would very much like to have those resources. I think everyone in Ukraine is pretty excited about not having to share those resources with Mother Russia. And you're having a very aggressive situation that, this is why Russia is not part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization for this exact reason, a organization bent on ensuring that the events of World War I and World War II don't happen again. And yet here we are with someone testing these waters. So it worries me. It worries me a lot. So that's just my take. The beard of knowledge. I bet you have a much greater take on what's going on than I do.
I don't know if it's a greater take, but I mean, I think I'll start out by saying it's very complicated. I think especially for most people, but I think about young people, and we all live in the United States of America. I think looking at this is something that would fall under the guise of like civics or social studies or social sciences, right? And so when I think of the movement over the last 10 years to push away from science and social science and focus on math and English language arts in our school systems, so many of our young people are not equipped with the basic tools to really understand the complexities of what's happening right now in the Ukraine and Russia. Omar, you gave us a little history ride, but I think, most people don't have those facts, and you did too, Charles. So I think information is really important, given this current conflict. I'm an adult, I'm well educated, I'm a political science major, and I still struggle to find good, reliable, quote unquote, trustworthy news about the situation, right? It feels like everybody has an agenda and everybody's putting a slant on it. And I, for one, I'm not super, I couldn't say or suggest that I'm super up to speed on what's happening over there, which is a problem. And so I think that's number two. Number three, I always think about young people, whether it's, regardless of how intense or not intense the bombing is. We've seen a couple of video clips of like big bombs going off and, big flashes in the sky. And my heart immediately goes to like, children and the trauma that children will experience as a result of this invasion, right? And that's kind of where my heart goes. Obviously, that part of the world is war and invasion and conflict is quite frequent. Even if people are used to it, it's still a whole new generation that's having to go through it. And then the last piece is, I remember I was in high school when the first Gulf War happened. And I remember as a young person getting not what was a draft card, but we got like a preliminary notice that a draft was going to happen. So they put us on notice and they sent it to my house and I got it in the mail and I was like, holy holy, you know what, I can't believe this is actually happening to, the potential for me to, and I don't come from a military family, but many of my uncles served in the military, going back to like the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and since. So, the military is definitely a part of the fabric of my family, and it actually helped a lot of my family to kind of grow out of, low income status and poverty through things like the GI Bill, et cetera, et cetera. But I just think about young people that are potentially thinking about, like, am I going to get drawn into this? What does that mean? Because it gets real very quickly.
Yeah. And I think, the USSR broke up in 1991. It was only 30 some odd years ago. And, I think Putin is very adamant about putting the USSR back together. I mean, I think it's a little different than what you're talking about, Omar, just because Ukraine used to belong to the USSR. And I think that he feels like it's their birthright. I feel like he feels as a strong leader, like it's his duty to bring those back together. And I think that when you look at the NATO and who's in NATO and our allies and people that we promise to, support, there's another group on the other side. And I think Iran, North Korea, and China are also watching to see what this response is going to be. I mean, we are in the midst of geopolitical conflict unraveling.
Yep.
And I think that, like you said, I do think that schools have somewhat softened up on social studies and civics, both global, civics tends to be more here. Yeah. Social studies can kind of be here and abroad. And I think that we are part of a global community. That's why milk, everything from gas to milk and everything, these things have consequences, and they have consequences on our stock market and our economy. I do speak as somebody whose father is a Marine, uncle is a Marine, brother, best friend, Army, and my nephew, his son is in basic training right now. And, and there were some conversations between my brother and his son yesterday that will remain, between them, but around the possibility of what can happen. There are real people that fight in these conflicts. And, to Ukraine's credit, they've been fighting back. I was watching one of the reports where a bomb went off near the Ukraine airport, right? So I just feel, we're going to touch on other topics right now, but I do think that right now, teachers, educators, you're on. Like how we have these conversations, how we discuss these conflicts. And I said this off camera to you all, but I know we're in the moment of like a tiff, not a tiff, it's bigger than a tiff. There's a cultural war that's happening around what can be taught in classrooms, who should be teaching, the importance of these things. And what I said to the fellas, and I said, listen, if you think that's something, let us enter into the global politics of what potentially can be World War III. And then wait and see what curriculum does during that time. Wait and see what happens when that happens. And so I remember, like, I'm younger than you two, but y'all remember when we would look at the map and it was USSR, and then I remember then it was USSR and then it just wasn't. You know what I mean? It's like this huge block. And so, I don't know if we have a lot of details here, but, we wanted to just have a space where we could address what was happening, give you the facts that we know, and also just like, we have to address things as they come up before it happened in the other topic. So I know that was long-winded, but you were about to jump in.
No, man. I was agreeing with you, man. I was just saying, like, look, we grew up under a certain paradigm, but the information that we're receiving right now is difficult to interpret because you all were saying it best before we got live. It's like everybody's got their spin on this.
Yep.
And everybody wants to politicize this versus trying to share, I think, historical fact about what was going on. I'm like, look, ultimately, man, like, watch Kingsman. It'll give you a good rundown of World War I, what happened, the Bolshevik Revolution, and, Lenin's conquest towards trying to create Karl Marx's vision of a communist society, a reality. The ultimate aftermath was not a communist society at all. It was a dictatorship filled with massive genocide. Stalin can be credited for being one of the most genocidal human beings on the face of the planet, and that is, in my opinion, not okay. But hell, we can, we could take a step back and be like, well, was the United States also founded on the genocide of the entirety of Native Americans and the subjugation of an entire race? Like, history is jacked up.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important, I think, for anyone who's looking into this issue to, instead of saying, this is the way it is, to ask, why is this the way it is?
Mm-hmm.
And what does each side have to gain from this? And what are the relevant facts as to why the Russians feel claim to this? The Ukrainians are still trying to hang on to their very delicate independence. And what does the rest of the world have to gain or lose? Because I say this time and time and time again, that the United States getting involved, cool, I'm glad, but then, we ain't getting involved in Sudanese genocide and so
African countries. Yeah. I mean, we went to, we only got involved with the Venezuelan folks because there was some stuff over there for us in it. I mean, listen, I mean, there are, and you can go to the 3, David, because the camera just been on me, but I mean, we can all just have this conversation, man, before we go into your article, David. I just think that we have, I mean, my goodness, man, being in America, I will say this. There's a lot of stuff we got to deal with. There's a lot of injustice. There's a lot of racial unrest. There's a lot of stuff. But do not also forget, like, there are just some things that the young people here have just not had to deal with. I went to school with folks from the Middle East whose houses have been bombed, like who, like had escaped something, really crazy. And I think that that's why Putin is striking a nerve, because he gave the United States and Europe a direct threat. Like, hey, you'll see something on your soil if XYZ happens. And I, like I said, my brother, I can only imagine. I'm not a father. And David, I'll come to you on this. I can only imagine the type of conversation that my brother, who is a soldier and who has seen war, and that war has not touched this place. And even when I used to be super like ideological and have a bunch to say about Bush and this, that, and the third, he still was like, you've never seen war. Like, you don't know what war is. And so the conversation that father has to now have with my nephew, who's 18 years old, at the potential of seeing war, right? Like, that's just a different ball game. So even though I'm going to push America to be better, I'm always going to push America to be better. I'm always going to call those things out. It is not lost on me that, like, I have not had to live in that type of condition where, I mean, there might be a terrorist attack, but I'm talking about an actual war. And people got up and went to work today in Ukraine. Like, it put so much things in perspective when I was watching the news today, where they were just like, we still got to go to work. And then I think about the conversations we're having here around certain things. Like, I'm trying to not have any opinion in the piece, but I'm taking things in as a person. So David, you as a father to a boy, and not just boys, it's not just boys that go to war. I just want to be very clear. But if we're looking at historically and what those numbers are, it's overwhelmingly, male. I mean, how do you process that? And like I said, I won't go. I don't have all the details of what that conversation was, and even if I did, I wouldn't go into full detail about it, because that's a very different type of conversation. But I'm just asking, you as a father, how you processing that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely talking to my son about it. He for some reason he is like, he's 11, and he's definitely like, he has this like wonder about like Russia and Putin, right, as a dictator. And now all of a sudden there's like this invasion, right? So we talk about it for sure. I'm as transparent with him as I can be. And I think there's also an opportunity here for educators to make sure that they're talking with kids about this in the correct forum. And I'm hoping that educators are being provided with, like materials from either, their networks or their districts or their county offices of education. This is a teaching moment, right? And it's not simply about like what's happening in Russia and in Ukraine, but it can be used as an example to teach other instances in history, other wars or invasions that have happened here in this country. And so I think, I always try and create a very non-abstract example of like what's going on over here. Let's think about, and I had this conversation with my son last night. And Omar, maybe you'll appreciate this. We were talking about Texas, right? Just think about like Texas as a place before it was Texas, right? It was inhabited by, at some point, millions of years ago, probably just armadillos, maybe, and scorpions, but eventually, indigenous people, right? Indigenous people, the indigenous tribes that roamed that land that is now called Texas before it was Texas. And then you have this mix of racial groups, ethnic groups, and then the labels of Lone Star or Texas or the United States and not Mexico, whatever. There's so many layers to like people living together in groups that identify based on their tribe, their ethnicity. And then you have all of these other complicating factors that happen throughout history, around labels that are put onto particular places that may not, Texas is made up of so many different diverse groups now. And I think if you look at the history of it, it's very similar to what we see happening in the Ukraine, where it's not so clear cut.
Right.
Texas is not like a unified state within the United States. There are so many different ethnic groups and racial groups and people that identify with Texas in different ways as there is in Ukraine. So I think this is a teachable moment, and even for young children to understand, some of the basic building blocks of how we got here as a society, looking at colonialism and totalitarianism and all of these things, which can be applied across a number of different historical situations. So, but it's unfortunate, and I do agree with you, Charles. I mean, I think for us here in the United States, war is kind of an abstract thing, right?
Right.
I mean, we haven't had to go through it directly here, but that's not to say that it won't happen. So, yeah,
it's crazy, man. I mean, I don't know if you have anything else you want to chime into that, before I shift us into the next part. But I wanted to make sure I gave space.
No, man. The
looks like
one
we have
thing I quickly go ahead.
No, it looks like we have a recommendation in the chat from Ms. Toya on a Netflix, How to Become a Tyrant. So I have to check that out.
Oh yeah,
a good teaching tool.
Oh yeah. Oh, do we? If and David, you got to do the comments too, brother. My arm, I have to lean forward to get to the keyboard. But
I'm good. I'm here.
I got you, brother. That's all good. It's a lot of balls to juggle, man. I got you. I think, and I've seen How to Be a Tyrant. It's actually a pretty good show. I mean, so. Oh, go ahead. I think you were. I didn't want to speak over you, brother.
Oh no, man, it's all good, man. My only last comment is, a lot of people talk about critical thinking and the need for critical thinking, and I always think that history has always been one of the best mechanisms for critical thought, because you're critically dissecting information. You're not believing it on first pass. You're trying to gather as much information as possible, dissect it, get a ton of sources, and dive deep and realize, holy smokes, like a lot of information that is given to us is a lot of smoke and mirrors. So to our listeners, just remember that when it comes to the news, remember that when it comes to everything else, like a lot of smoke and mirrors. And we got to be able to take a step back, listen, understand, what is it that they're telling me? What do they have to gain from this information? What other sources can I gather? Because it's never going to be as simple as just simply you have a despotic ruler trying to take control of this country. There's some major complications behind that. And I think that's a great lesson for kids and a great lesson for adults. So, David, well said, man. Well said.
Yeah.
Straight up, a lot of propaganda these days, Toya. It's hard to figure out what's what. It really is.
Well,
that's why we got a doctor on the show, man. The man's a damn doctor.
I mean, and we got somebody who's about to be a public official. The best dressed one there, brother. We got you.
Maybe, man. That's why we got David, man. Smart dude. He's helping us figure this out. Pink pink sweatshirt and all, man. I should have worn mine, man.
He's a fashionista today, man. I will say this. So I mean, it might not feel like it's related, but I think this is actually related. I think so. There's an article that Dave is going to break down for us, and the headline is this. It's very simple: confidence in California public schools declines sharply, and the third give LA a D or an F. And I mean, he'll break down the details of it, but I think just even one, I don't think it's just California where there's been a decline in trust in that public system or whatnot. But two, I think in times like this, where the country kind of depends on public education to get certain messages and nationalism out there, in times of war, if that's waning, there could be a lot of consequences. So without me having a thought or a reaction to it or whatnot, David, what are we learning from this? Just from this article, and I'll scoot up to help with you with the camera on this one.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so what we're going to be talking about now is, and this is pretty fresh off of the press. That's kind of how we operate here. Doesn't mean that we're unprepared for the shows. It just means that we got to wait till that last minute to get the good kernel, the good nugget. So what we're looking at is a study that was recently conducted. I think this year or late last year, 2022. So this is fresh. Comparing a 2011 study to a 2022 study. Similar questions around public education in California. So we have two, goalposts. One of them is 2011 and 2022. And we're able to look and kind of disaggregate by different groups and regions how Californians are feeling about public education. And before we go into some of the specifics, we're not going to go into all the detail, but I'm wondering if a good question for folks that are either in the stream or that are going to watch this later is, I wonder if other states are conducting this kind of polling research, because I feel like it's very valuable. So we'll leave that for later. High level, what this study revealed, they asked parents to grade schools based on a traditional grading system, so like an A, B, C, D, or F, similar to the grades that students receive. And Charles, I'm going to say, how do I get my screen into, can I share my screen here? I'm doing this live. Share, right? Boom. Can we do that? Share screen. Okay, here we go.
I got you. I'll help you out, man. If you got it up there, I'll help you out. But
I got it up there. It's good.
Okay. Well, now you got to hit that box. You keep going. I'll get the article up for you if that's what you're trying to get.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's do that. So I think the top level of what we're seeing in this study is that the rankings across the board have significantly dropped. So in 2011 in California, about 55% of participants in the study gave schools an A, and about 20% an A or a B. In this recent round, it dropped to 35. So from 55% in 2011 to 35% in 2022. And so this is like the grading the schools then and now chart that you'll see if you scroll down a little bit, Charles. Right there. Nope, keep going. Keep going. Right, keep going. You went past it. I think it's at the very top. Sorry.
The very top. Okay.
Yeah,
is it this one right here?
Yeah, that one. There you go. So we can see over the last 10 years, and obviously, what's impacting these 2022 numbers are COVID and school shutdowns and closures and the disruption. But in general, what you see is a pretty significant shift in California with parent satisfaction with public schools, right? That's pretty significant looking at the data. Scrolling down a little bit, another interesting finding around race, and we can skip the region part, but if you look at race, which you're going to hit right there, is that, with this most recent round, You see what I'm seeing there? So basically, it's fascinating. So Asians 39% high marks, 21% low, which is almost the reciprocal of Black African American families. 24% giving the schools an A or a B, with 34% giving them a D or an F. So opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Which is very significant. You could ask, there's a lot of questions that you can ask around, well, is it just about education in general, or is it about the kinds of public schools that your children have access to? That's a really interesting finding. And then one more, if you scroll down, well, we don't have to scroll down, but I'll just tell you what it says. There's a question around teacher unions and people's thoughts on the unions. And I just want to state very clearly, teacher unions came in, probably in the low 40%, as in, this is something that's helping my kid, on par with standardized testing. So the public feels about the same around standardized testing as they do with the public teachers unions. And I'll leave it there. It's an interesting fact, right? I mean, if you're only as popular as a standardized test, you got a problem.
I mean, when you say it works to, I'm looking at where it says works to help improve schools, right? And 39% describe it as well. 42% says not well. I mean, and know the best way to improve education. 42% do not believe that it does, with 20% in both respectively, basically saying that they don't have an opinion. I mean, that's a pretty damning statistic for an institution that has been pretty ironclad for a minute. And not to just jump in here, I know but like we seen this not that long ago with another union that seemed to be ironclad, that you didn't see anything piercing that veil or whatnot. And that was the police. That was just police unions for a minute too. So police unions kind of had their reckoning. I don't know how far off that teachers union reckoning is. And listen, man, when your solution for everything is to strike, your right to strike should be utilized like sparingly. But if that's what you always go to, and parents are now like, wait, what's happening right now? What's going on? And we still want to support, I think they still want to support teachers. And I think a lot of people are saying, I support teachers. I don't know how I feel about their union or whatnot. But, I have a lot of reactions to everything that you just said in there to kind of make it plain. But let me not take up too much space. David and y'all, what, Omar, what's your reaction just to, in your layman's term and how you're like experiencing this, bro? What does that article bring up for you? And I think we could just stay in this article for the rest of the show. I think it kind of goes in well.
Yep.
Yeah, no, man. Listen, so people are going to make that assessment based upon their own experience. So isn't this kind of like a shocking statement of saying, oh, look, so if you're Asian, you're pretty stoked on your school. Why? Why is that? Now, if you're Asian, like, my sister's roommate at Stanford, and you've been taking Kumon math since you were in 6th grade, and you not only scored a 1600 on the SAT, but essentially corrected the SAT, you may conflate the school with these great results. And that's one thing. If you're Latino and you're simply saying, well, it's like, hijito está en escuela, está bien, like things are okay, you may also say, okay, things are okay. I think what was startling that I saw was that, Black parents are essentially grading schools D and F because their schools are not servicing them well, and haven't been servicing them well for a very long time. And now we're seeing the direct reaction from Black parents to be like, this is what we've been dealing with. Now you're asking us what's up, and this is exactly how it's been. And this is, you're barely figuring this out right now. So all of this is a stem to me of looking at the microcosm of their schools and looking at historic disparities with Black schools and Black communities and Latino communities, whereas I think Latino communities, especially immigrant populations, have a different take, because it's like, well, like a lot of our immigrant parents may or may not have gotten a sixth grade education. So if there's a free public education,
yeah,
this is better than what my kids were ever going to get, or better than what I got, until they get into that second, third generation where they're like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't good. And they haven't been really servicing us that well once we kind of really get to understand what we're dealing with systemically. So this, I think, corresponds well with understanding for, I don't want to say ever the first time, but finally in a statistical analysis of this is what people have been talking about for decades. So welcome to the party, pal.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's, go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree, and I also think it's interesting. Like when we look at some of this data that is disaggregated, we're not talking about schools that are 100% Asian that are being polled, or 100% white, or African American, or Latino. These are the same families that are in the same schools that are having a very different experience, right? Sometimes within a similar school system, but many times within a single school, where parents will report on fundamentally like a different experience, right? Like one school, Asian parents are happy, white parents are happy, Latino parents are kind of happy, African American parents are very dissatisfied, right? Within one school within a school system. So I'm not really surprised by a lot of what this polling is showing. I think the low marks around that the teachers unions are getting is surprising, and obviously there's work that they need to do to make sure that they're relevant in the eyes of the public. That's for another show. The other piece, which I think is interesting, Charles, can you put that article up one more time?
Hold on, I got to reshare.
Yeah, sorry. There's a question on standardized testing, and I feel I'm not like a proponent of standardized testing, but I understand its role and its importance for a number of different reasons, from the individual child to their family to a classroom or a teacher or a grade level or a school system. But they asked about opinions on standardized testing. And, if you do enough survey work and polling work and you see clear kind of arcing trend lines, you're like, okay, there's something happening here. And so in this last study, they polled around standardized testing, whether they improve or hurt kids, I guess. Hurt education. Do they improve education, or do they hurt education, right? And across a number of different age groups, right? And essentially, we don't have to pull it up, but I'll just explain it.
I'm sorry. You know what? I had it up and I just didn't push the button. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, there it is. The younger the group that was polled, the greater belief that standardized testing hurts education. Mm-hmm. and the older, it starts to deteriorate and shift more towards it helps to improve. That's a very, that's it's a very interesting take, and I think something interesting to like dive into, because now you're talking about like culture, generation, other factors at play. So that's an interesting one.
You know what? I mean, I have a lot of reactions to this. I wanted to let you like explain. I think, as the Black guy here, I'm like, yo, like none of this stuff is surprising to me at all. And I think there's a few different things, right? I think let me just start with the general overturn. Black folks have not been super high on education for a while. And I remember when I was younger, and my parents would never take my side against a teacher. And then something started to shift towards high school. Like something shifted. And I think that piece around quality, and I think that, you know, I do come from a family that wanted to know what those test scores looked like. They wanted to know where I ranked. They wanted to know, you know, how well I was doing. And I think, and I listen, I'm a part of academia. I have a bachelor's degree, I have a master's degree, I have a doctorate, and there is something that was happening where these studies started to come out about how bad, you know, that these, not that the test itself was just flawed and we could fix it, but just that the mere mention of a test was bad, right? Where it was inherently bad and racist. And I'm not saying that is not, because I think there are some things in there, but there is a deeper concept around what accountability and what you're supposed to be able to do afterwards and being able to show and prove, like, became kind of like the devil. I think there's the other thing around representation. Like, the same way people have been talking about this, like, you know, if I ask you what's the percentage of black male teachers across the country, there's a lot more people today that know that it's less than 2% than what it was 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And I'm doing 2 different research projects right now. One is in Cleveland, where Cleveland is a mostly black city. It's about 48% black, and it was like 40% white. But when you look at who's in those public schools, it's 65% black and like 15% white in those schools. And oh, guess what other demographic those white kids fall into? It's poverty. So then you start looking at that and it's like, wait a second, what's happening here? You know what I mean? And I think black folks are just at a place where it's like, yo, this is not what we signed up for. This is not what we decided to get. And I remember being a kid and hearing about Brown versus Board. It's something I'm supposed to be very, very proud of. And in a way I am, right? Like what Thurgood Marshall was able to do or whatnot. But now as an adult and somebody who knows how to research, like, oh, there was a lot of consequences. We fired black educators, and not just like people that signed up to be teachers. We're talking about physicists that like had that as a job, but also taught at the high school. We're talking about authors who had a job, but taught writing at the high school, and we got rid of it. And then there's some research that we're doing without going into too much detail, David. Like, I did a report around how black kids felt about having black leadership that looked like them. And we had kids getting emotional. We had kids talking about, I study how this woman walks and how she talks, right? And just this is a very early part. We haven't talked to a bunch of different schools in the Brown version of this. We're still working, but we'll ask those same young people the same type of question. And it's like, well, my whole school is brown. Like, I've been around brown people. I've seen brown educators. Like, it's just not and I think, and you know, David, me and you were reflecting on it. It's like, I don't see it as a bad thing. It's just like, they're used to representation. All I'm saying is, with these data points that we're seeing, I'm not surprised at this, like, where people are having to scrape and claw to feel represented or whatnot. I'm not surprised around the union piece either. I mean, listen, when most of my teachers are white, and this is the thing, when most of my teachers are white and you striking every other week, and the only time you really busting your hump to teach my kid is so the propaganda around what you're striking over as opposed to your subject matter, I can see parents being like, I support you. I support you. I support you. Wait a second, man. It's the 5th time. Did Chicago just strike again? Like, what is happening? Like, or like, you know, my cousin who passed away, who was a firefighter, Chicago is different than Oakland, right? Where the it's all a part of the city, right? So, you know, in Oakland, for example, you guys, the mayor has no control over education in Oakland. It's an elected school board. In Chicago, up until recently, and they're working on it, but up until recently, all that stuff was under mayoral control. So there's a pot of money around retirement. So when teachers start to negotiate and push and push and push, it's like that's pushing into the firefighters' retirement. That's pushing into, you know, police officer retirement. And then you got these people that do these jobs and they're like, wait a second, hold on, what's happening? All I'm saying is, I think it's an amazing article that you pulled. I think everybody should read it. And I think that it is not just California. I think that this is the precipice of something that's about to come on the heels of change. And black people have been the fastest growing group of homeschooled people in this country. And now people are starting to realize, you know, I ain't even got a lot of money. I need to go to work and all that stuff. But if I'm worried about my baby's brain, I got to do it on my own. So sorry for that long-winded, jumbled, emotional response. but I see it even in the research that I'm doing. Like I see it. And David, like it's so funny, David, you and I just had this reflection with you where I was like, nah, like this is interesting, right? Like, yo, like maybe we should even think about some different type of questions, because the issue that this group of people had, while they might be similar in some ways, is not the same issue as this other group. And so anyway, let me stop, because I'm in Indianapolis right now and I'm looking at schools here and I'm looking at kids where I'm seeing these things, and I'm seeing young Black charter leaders that don't care about charter schools or traditional schools or whatever, but they went in that apparatus so they could just have some type of autonomy, some type of say so on what they can teach kids that doesn't fall under like what a Republican ran like government says they have to teach. So
here's another quick little snippet from this thing, and then I want to hear from Omar. Like,
I know, because I ran my damn mouth for way too long.
In Texas. So here's another interesting factoid. Public school parents and Democrats give the highest marks for public schools, right? Non-public, GOP and Black voters gave them the lowest grade, right? We didn't dig into all this different levels of disaggregation, but it's all there. That follows kind of a similar theme. So Omar, what would this look like if you feel like, the health of public education in Texas, based on what what would this look like?
Oof. Yo, I mean, that'd be a mess. It really depends on like who you're talking to, what city you're doing it in. So like, for example, I think in Texas as a whole, you're going to see probably a little bit more of an optimistic look. But you start dipping into Dallas and you're going to start seeing some very similar results. You start dipping into Houston, you're going to start seeing some very similar results. And particularly around Black and brown communities in Houston, you're going to start basically being like, yo, look, like we've been out here neglected and disparaged for decades. So no, we're not cool with what's going on. The thing is that the choice movement in Texas is prevalent in large cities, Dallas and Houston, and you've got a lot of Black and brown parents who are really excited about the choice movement. And you're going to again fall on party lines where sadly the Democratic institution is simply saying like our schools are great, and the students are saying something radically different. Then you fall into like your Latin American communities all along the border and in El Paso. And I would arguably say that scores will probably tick up significantly higher in approval of the schools. But again, that goes into this immigrant ideology where, again, a lot of my parents are immigrants and so forth, and simply saying like, well, this is better than what we were getting in Mexico, so this is okay. And it's not until you start hitting those like second, third, fourth, fifth generation Texans, Mexican Americans, where you're going to start seeing the disapproval of those public schools. You'll see a higher tick up in rural communities because the school becomes kind of like a hub, if you will, for those rural communities. You'll start seeing a greater disaggregated dissatisfaction in the urban communities. That shouldn't be untrue of everything that I saw in California. So you're going to have your level of similarities. I think the difference is that you're going to have a very outspoken group of people who are saying that they are satisfied, but that may fall into a realm where in Texas, for example, and I talk about this often, school districts started separating themselves from their urban districts in order to basically keep all their money. So I'll give you a great example. Highlands Ranch in Dallas is one of the most prolific examples of this in the country. So Highlands Ranch is smack dab in the middle of Dallas. What they did is essentially secede from Dallas ISD. So it's just this bubble It's this bubble in the middle of the map. It's like, here's Dallas. So my head is Dallas, and right here is Highlands Ranch. Seceded from the school district because they're uber rich, and they decided to do that in order to keep all their money. So those schools,
we have a place like that too. It's called Piedmont in Oakland. It's one of the places that when all the areas came together to become Oakland, Piedmont said, "Now we're good. we're gonna be right in the middle of the city and be our own entity."
I mean, not even a school district, but a whole city. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they're their whole city. They're like, we don't want to be like the Fruitvale said, "We'll come." Temescal, we'll come. Everybody else. Piedmont said, no, we're good. Sorry, Omar. I just wanted to let you know it wasn't.
No, man,
it ain't just y'all.
It's happening. It's happening across the country, and I think that you all can empathize. So I bet those cats in Piedmont are like, man, these schools are badass. And folks in Highlands Ranch are like, man, this public school is amazing. And Westlake and Austin is like, man, this is awesome, because they all seceded from, Austin ISD, Dallas ISD, and all of those places. If you look at maybe the charter schools, there's major satisfaction amongst parents who are in the charters in Dallas and Houston and San Antonio, especially, and some of the larger cities. So it's really about just aggregating it. But Texas has had a very interesting history of purposeful secession and purposeful segregation along economic lines. And I bet if you accounted for that data, you would start seeing some stark realities in terms of like, things are cool to be like, no, man, things been effed up for a while. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for paying attention to us. Like,
so you can
outside of Houston, they'd be like, yo, things have been jacked up for a really long time.
Yo, man,
you could save the University of Texas or whatever other research body that's going to do the similar polling in Texas that we just looked at, in California. You could save them money because you pretty much just laid it out.
Well, I thought you were going to say more, David. Sorry about that. I thought David was going to say more. That's my bad. Well, that's going to roll us into just our final thoughts. And it was just good to see you all. I've been having an amazing time here in Indy. So there's more work to do. But Omar, let's have you go. Just final thoughts for the night. What you want to leave people with from this episode, brother?
Yeah, man. As always, thank you so much. First half of the show, please. I want to try to implore on our audience that if you hear a piece of news, try to dissect it, try to understand it, and try to get as much information as you can from newer sources that may be a bit more impartial than others. But what a great lesson for social studies. As far as the article was concerned, which I was absolutely fascinated by, this is, in my opinion, parent voice. This is their commentary on how they believe these schools are going, the dissatisfaction with standardized testing. And I honestly think that this is what we talk about so often on the show. And as someone who is running for political office, something that I'm so emphatic about is you got a bunch of like people who think they know better in a room in an informational bubble, and they just think clearly we must have our finger on the pulse and we know it's right. And I think this article is like, word, because your parents don't feel that way. So whatever it is that you're doing in your communities that you think is awesome, you're getting a D and F rating from a third of those people in Los Angeles. And I bet if we started really getting into parent dissatisfaction and why you're getting D's and F's, you're going to probably find some startling results. And I think those are the pieces and nuggets of information that I live by most, because boy, I bet Dr. Charles Cole and I bet Mr. David Castillo would love to hear what are those 3 things, 5 things that made you rate this school a D or an F? Yeah. Was it the attention to your child? Was it the literacy skills? Was it the social emotional component? Was it the drill and kill? I want to know why you rated this a DNF. But the thing is, like, articles like this come and go and often are ignored. And I love this show because I think it not only gives voice to the people and their concerns, but gives us a chance with our audience to dissect this and be like, what are the critical lessons that we need to take from this? Because what this sounds like is a cry for help. And I want to know exactly what that cry for help is asking for, because we always have an idea. You know, I think Dr. Charles Gould expounds on it elaborately and eloquently every single week. We've been dealing with this for decades. David talks about it. The Latino community has been dealing this with decades. But I'd like to get into, like, can we actually start fixing some of this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
When we do start trying to fix it, why are you pushing back so damn much?
Mm-hmm.
So those are my final thoughts on what we can do with this and where we should go with this.
Awesome. David.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the first part of the show, I think, you know, I want to encourage educators and parents too to talk to your children about what's happening in the world right now, like what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, and how it ties back to, you know, your own experience or, you know, like what's happening in the United States. There's so many connections, and I feel like, you know, it's important that we don't like look away, pretend that these things are not happening, but instead like lean in and learn as much as we can, and try and make those connections. I mean, that's what teaching social science, social studies, and history is all about, looking for those connections. So that's number one. I think number two, on the polling data that we saw, yeah, there was no surprise. There were a couple of surprises there. I thought the teacher unions would have come up a little bit higher than standardized testing, but outside of that, nothing really, you know, breakthrough for me. But going back to Omar's point, yeah, wake up call. And I think, you know, parents are telling you, they're telling you through your local school survey, your district survey, this polling, eventually they're going to vote with their feet, right? That's the ultimate vote of like, this system or the school is not serving the needs of my children or my family. And people will vote. We're seeing that in Oakland, California right now, where, you know, they're facing the threat of school closures for a number of schools that have historically enrolled, not served, but enrolled Black and brown children. And I say, like, you're looking at a building that was built to enroll and serve maybe 800 kids, and there's only 200 kids there. So the community has already effectively told you what they think about your schools. And so I think, you know, for these people that are on the receiving end of this data, school districts, school leaders, policymakers, like, look at this stuff. This stuff really matters. Parents are speaking. And it's really important that we understand what they're trying to say. And then the last piece is just a quick shout out. Like I said, before we started the podcast, I was, you know, facilitating a professional development with teachers. And just a quick shout out to like teachers, school leaders, support staff, everybody that's out there doing the work right now. It's obviously a hard time. Hopefully it's going to get better, but I appreciate you. And I know my other co-hosts on the show appreciate what you do for kids every day.
Yeah, man. And just finally, just for me, I just appreciate you fellas. One, if you are in schools and you have, you know, and it's age appropriate, we have to get back to teaching our young people how to like read to understand. Like the major news sources that we look at are just more of like opinion pieces. So we got to learn how to like actually distill facts out of things. You know, I never teach a young person. I never tell a young person what to think. I try to teach them how to think. You know what I'm saying? Not how to think, but you know what I'm saying? Like, yo, this is the process in which you can do that, so you're not just fully being manipulated. And just prayers to those people over there, man. I think this conversation around this article, this is not new to me, and this is not. I don't think it's just in California, and I think that this thing that's starting to get a little bit of steam here, a little bit of steam there, is going to grow. And I think a lot of white racist people have helped it. I think that what they have done in this last year and a half have given a blueprint around what could actually happen if you lift your voices high enough. Now, there's an argument to be made that, you know, these black parents or brown parents or whoever, or these parents in poverty may not have the same power or voice because of the privilege or whatever the case is. But it's been showing that you do not have to, if you don't like what schools are doing, there are options for you. And I'll just lay this down for Oakland, the place that I know the best and that I love. Oakland was having a bunch of black parents and brown parents make choices. And they had one application that made it easier for folks to do, and they started to lose out. And they said that they appreciated and that they respected those voices and that autonomy and agency of those parents. But as soon as they started to bleed students, instead of making the schools better, instead of improving what they did, instead of building on equality, instead of actually addressing these issues, instead of being schools that could actually compete, instead of taking innovative ideas like we said around having a black immersion school with Yemenis folks, since that is a growing population and it could be attractive. Instead of doing that, they changed the rules. And I think that what that article really shows is that a lot of people not playing fair. They're not playing the game. They just change the rules constantly. And I think the time for that shit is coming to an end. I think the time for that is about to be different. I think that in this world that we're seeing where people are just constantly making the rules, listen, world, you're going to get to a place where these black people and these brown people stop doing the right thing. Stop being the nicer people. Like, you're going to get to a place where these people are actually really, really fed up the way that you all pouted and are getting quote unquote CRT out of here. That's not even CRT. And I think things are going to get a little rough moving forward. I think things will eventually get better, but I think we're going to enter into a different little rough period, man. But I'll just say, man, thank y'all for joining us as always. We appreciate y'all. This episode ended up being way more emotional for me than I expected it to be. I don't know why. Like, I'm not as poignant as I am today, but as I normally am. But like seeing this stuff and the research that I'm doing and like listening to people and hearing from people and like seeing even people in India now where I'm gonna go to Kentucky. Like, I'm talking to people in so many different places that think that they are the only ones facing things. And if those black people find each other, it's going to be a problem. For David and for Omar, I'm Dr. Charles Cole III, and we will see you all next time. And y'all have an amazing night and a great weekend. Peace.